I'm Kelly Sadler, and this is the Washington Times Politically Unstable. Today, we are joined by Steve Hilton. He's running for governor for the great state of California as a Republican and also is a Fox News personality. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. One of the things that I've noticed about the state of California was 6 months ago, there was horrendous wildfires. In the Pacific Palisades, the Altadena area, where about 15,000 structures and homes were utterly destroyed. President Trump, in his first week of office, first or second, came to visit California and promised a quick rebuild. But as of July, according to the state's own website, only 100 permits have been granted for people to start rebuilding their lives. I mean, why is this taking so long, especially since FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers and the federal government was there to basically pick up all of the hazardous waste and to clear these lots?
It's actually the same story as pretty much everything else that's going wrong in California, the reason I'm running, and everything else that led up to the wildfire disaster in the first place. And actually, when I was giving testimony to Congress about a couple of months or so after the fires about what happened, and one of the Democrats on the committee was pursuing this line of questioning that Republicans were obsessed about the idea that DEI had caused the wildfires because the fire chief was a lesbian, all this kind of stuff. And she asked me a question about that. And I said no. But then actually occurred to me in the hearing, and this is how I'll frame the response to your question today, that I said to her, actually, DEI was responsible for the wildfire disaster, Democrat extremism and incompetence. And those are the ingredients of the absolute disaster of the recovery, but also just very quickly to remind ourselves why we had the fires disaster of that scale in the first place. A combination of the Democrat extremism on climate policy that meant that you had such overgrown hillsides. Residents were being fined for doing the responsible thing and clearing the brush from near their property because of the climate ideologues and the extremism there. And then the total incompetence, the empty fire hydrants, the reservoir that was empty, the fire crews that were sent home, all of that stuff. That's why we had the disaster on the scale that we did. And it's exactly the same story with the recovery. Extremism and incompetence. Let's start with incompetence. Even though they promised, exactly as you mentioned, when President Trump was there, Karen Bass, the mayor, promised to his face. We all saw that press conference, that famous press conference around the table. And he said, why can't you get on with it? People want to go back now. I said, we will, Mr. President. We won't let delays happen. Exactly the opposite. You've had endless bureaucracy. They don't know how to run anything. They don't know how to make any process simple. They don't even know how to think about it the right way. I'll give you one little story that captures why it's like this. Karen Bass, about 4 months into it, so a couple of months ago, she put out a post on social media that caught my eye, and it said, I have just signed an executive order streamlining permitting for rebuilding LA. And I thought, well, that's, good, 4 months late, but still. But then I watched the clip from her own press conference where she was that she was summarizing in that post. Remember, the post said, I've just signed an executive order streamlining permitting, as if something has happened in the real world. What she actually said was, I have just signed an executive order tasking agency heads with developing paths forward to streamlining. And you just think, what is this? It's a joke. These people have no idea how to do anything. All they understand is process and bureaucracy. And they think that that is doing something, that actually just saying something and initiating a process in the bureaucracy is the same as action. And so that's the reason nothing's happened. And if I can just add on the extremism part, it's worse than, you talk about the small number of permits that have been issued. That's true. But even worse than that in many senses is how few have been applied for. It's not like you've got 15,000 applications and only 100 issued. You've only got a couple of hundred applications. Why? Because people are giving up, because it's such a nightmare. and it's such a hassle. And they're passing this legislation and that legislation to make it easier to buy up the land and turn it into and permit, instead of single family homes, which was the character of the neighborhood, to pursue their ideological extreme agenda of what they call density, where you have apartment buildings everywhere instead of single family homes. And so people are saying, I don't want to live there like that. I'm out of here. That's what's really going on. And it's a terrible, terrible thing.
Well, I mean, the New York Post did report after Karen Bass's press conference where she stood outside a home that was being rebuilt. The owner said, hey, listen, the only reason we were able to get this permit and able to start construction is because we promised to build our home exactly as it was prior to the burn. However, if you wanted to enlarge your basement or have a bigger garage, then that has to go through an entirely separate permitting process where your taxable base on your home will rise, and people are wondering if they can afford it. So there is a lot of bureaucratic red tape around this, and a lot of families that are still homeless, considering their options, which is just terrible. But also in the news with the great state of California is the sanctuary state policy. As we know, Gavin Newsom declared California a sanctuary state, in LA specifically as a sanctuary city, where Karen Bass was on the talk shows this past weekend saying that she doesn't agree at all with Donald Trump's immigration policies, that he's doing it all wrong, and that the residents of California, who are largely Hispanic, are all running scared. And that's going to have a negative effect on its economy. People are afraid to go to coffee shops for fear of being arrested with ICE. As you know, several weeks ago, there was the riots in LA protesting ICE and Trump's immigration policy. What do you make of this? And if you were governor, how would you reverse course?
So the context for this is that what ICE is doing, what President Trump is doing and his team, Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, everyone, enforcing federal law. They're enforcing the law as written and as Congress voted for. And on top of that, implementing the decision of the electorate in the election last year to vote for this. President Trump couldn't have been clearer in the election campaign about what he was intending to do on immigration. People voted for it. Now, what you're actually seeing in California is the Democrats, whether it's Gavin Newsom at the state level, Karen Bass at the city level, refusing to enforce the law and, to borrow from their language, trying to overturn the election result that they don't like. But that's not how it works. These are the people who lecture us endlessly about our democracy. Well, people voted for this, and it's now being delivered, and they're trying to block it. Now, if you get into the details of the policy, the sanctuary state law that was passed in 2017, SB 54, actually, despite all these local leaders and state leaders, whether that's mayor or governor or sheriffs or police chiefs or whatever, they all say, in California, our hands are tied. It's the sanctuary state law. Within that law, and I've read it, there is a section that's very clear that there is discretion, that's the word that's used, for local and state law enforcement to work with ICE in order to facilitate the removal of illegal immigrants who have also, within the last 15 years, been convicted of a crime. And there's a very long list of those crimes. And of course, it includes serious crimes like murder and robbery and assault and so on, but also drug possession and having an illegal firearm and all sorts of hundreds of crimes. Right. So there is discretion within the sanctuary state law to cooperate. And if you did that, if you had cooperation, you wouldn't need the kind of confrontation that we're seeing. You don't see those scenes in other states where you have local and state law enforcement working with federal law enforcement in order to enforce the law. And so all of this drama and chaos and the fear that they talk about, that's all being stoked by the Democrats, by their decision to ignore not just federal law, but also state law and refuse to cooperate in any way with ICE. So the answer to the question, what would I do? I would uphold the law, both federal and state. And I would work with ICE in order to get people who have committed crimes and are here illegally out of the country. And there's one last point I'd make. And people might say, well, what about the removal of people whose only crime was coming here illegally? Well, first of all, I should say, as a legal immigrant myself, who became a citizen. We moved here in 2012, my wife and my two sons, and I became a citizen. We're all citizens now. I became a citizen in 2021. It wouldn't have occurred to me to try and stay here illegally and break the law to do that. And so I think we've got to just, we can't accept a situation where we have a society where everyone kind of agrees that you can have law breaking on a massive scale. And the argument is often made, well, you need the workers and nothing, agriculture and construction, all those things, right? Well, let me tell you what I'm hearing on the campaign trail in Florida, in California. You've got, I just at a dairy the other day, in the northern part of the Central Valley. You had farm workers there. I was speaking to them. They're making about 50 grand a year. These are not big salaries. And they were saying that their girlfriends, they work full time. Their girlfriends make more money than they do off welfare, not working. They were telling me this, and they think it's outrageous. And then when you take that broadly across California and you look at the number of working age adults who are not working, right now in California, we have the highest unemployment rate in America. And then beyond that, you have the labor force participation rate, the proportion of adults who could be working, who are not working. And you put all those numbers together, right now in California, there's around 2.5 to 3 million people who are not working, who could be working. We're paying them not to work. So my argument is, before we start saying we got a labor shortage and we got to import foreign labor, and by the way, not pay all the things that need to be paid and healthcare and so on, and expect the taxpayer to pick that up, which is what's happening in California, $12 billion for illegal immigrant healthcare. Before we do any of that, why don't we try and make sure that every Californian who could be working is working? Let's start with that.
No, that's common sense. And the majority in poll after poll of Americans agree that if you're not working and you're an able-bodied American, you shouldn't be being able to exist off the taxpayer dole.
Exactly.
But another thing, and our editorial board has written about this, targeting the state of California. We had a lot of pushback from the governor's office, Governor Newsom, about the minimum wage laws there, especially within the fast food industry, and how it's causing a lot of closures. You've got In-N-Out looking to relocate from the state to Tennessee because of these minimum wage laws are unworkable. What would you do to confront this problem? I know a lot of people are like, oh yeah, $23 an hour, $15. That sounds really good in theory, but actually it's leading to fewer and fewer jobs in the state of California.
Well, let's again, what's causing all this? The starting point is that everything is so expensive in California. So we have the highest cost for everything that matters, the highest housing costs, rent, gas prices, highest electricity, water, you name it, the most expensive. We are 50th out of 50 states for affordability. And so the argument then comes, well, working class people in particular can't afford the basics. And that's true. We have the highest rate of poverty in the country. According to a recent United Way survey that's done every 2 years, 35% of Californians can't afford to meet their basic needs. And that's why you have the pressure for higher minimum wages, because people can't afford to live. But the first point is let's start by what you end up doing if you do that. You have this, what I call the Democrat doom loop. They put in these policies that make everything so expensive. They say, well, people can't afford to live, so let's raise the minimum wage. What does that do? Makes everything even more expensive because it increases costs to businesses. So either the price goes up or they resort to automation and you lose jobs, which is actually what's been happening. Thousands and thousands of jobs lost in the fast food industry since this higher minimum wage came in. But actually the real answer is to stop the stupid policies that are causing everything to be so expensive. For example, the climate policies that have given us the highest gas prices in the country. We have $5 gas here, heading to 6 or 7 or even 8 if the policies continue, more refineries close. That's why I've laid out a plan in my campaign to roll back those regulations so we can have $3 gas. That's the way through this, to actually lower costs by reducing the ridiculous regulations and the taxes that make everything so expensive.
So, Steve, I've got to ask you, I'm from New York. I have really low hopes that that state will ever turn red. California has been blue for so long. There's rumors that Kamala Harris is taking the month of July to evaluate whether or not she's going to jump into the gubernatorial contest. Can the state of California turn red? And why are you throwing your hat in the ring? Why do you believe you can change the tide?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is our best shot in at least 20 years. You're seeing the signs of that already. First of all, it's much less of a deep blue state than people sometimes think. They look at our state legislature, which is basically 80-20 Democrat, Republican. That's a direct result of gerrymandering. If you look at statewide elections for the last few years, then last 20 years, actually, then there's been a very steady Republican vote of just over 40%. Now, that's not 50%, but it's close. It's less of a gap than some people think. If you look more recently, the tide is really turning. You saw 10 counties last November flip from blue to red. Some major cities kicked out their DAs and mayors, whether that's Oakland and Alameda County, San Francisco. George Gascon, of course, in LA kicked out. You saw the Republican position on a bunch of statewide ballot initiatives on crime and taxes, minimum wage, rent control, all pass. The Republican position won on statewide ballot initiatives. Individual counties and cities doing where you're seeing Republicans picking up support, voter registration increases for Republicans, decreases for Democrats. So I think the ingredients are there. But honestly, I think that the real point is this, that actually, there's for a long time now in California, there's been a majority for change. It's not as if people like what's going on. Just the other week, a poll, 60% of people think that the state is going in the wrong direction. And that's been true for many years now. What we haven't had is a really positive, strong, energetic alternative put forward. And that's really why I'm running, because in my career, I've started and run businesses. I've worked in the government back in the day in the UK, senior advisor to the Prime Minister, responsible really for the implementation of our domestic reform program. I've started companies here in America, more recently my media platform. Putting all that together, I think I've got the opportunity to really go out there, put together a common sense, positive, pragmatic alternative to this far left nonsense we've got from 15 years of one party rule, and then really sell it and get people excited about it. And so far, it seems to be working. The first poll that came out with my name on it since I announced, that was last week, I'm leading the field. I'm the top candidate, only by a little. I'm 19%. Katie Porter is the first Democrat. She's there on 18%, but everyone else is in single digits. And then when they put Kamala Harris into the mix, I'm also right up there in the top two. So Kamala, she's on 27, I'm on 24, something like that. So whatever way you look at it, it seems to be the case that I'm emerging as the leading candidate to stop these terrible years of failure, whoever they put up, whether it's Kamala Harris or Katie Porter or whoever, because people are sick of it and they know it's time for change. And even if they don't want wholesale change in California, I hear from a lot of Democrats and independents, this one party rule is not healthy. It's not healthy to have just the same people in charge forever with absolutely no checks and balances. So just to have a bit of balance in the mix would be useful. So one way or another, I'm pretty confident we can pull this off.
Well, where can our readers and viewers go if they want to donate to your campaign or learn more about your platforms for change?
Thank you very much. Well, you can follow the campaign at Steve Hilton X. We're putting out videos all the time of me on the road, meeting people, some really, really great conversations there. I'd love everyone's support. We're up against this big Democrat machine, in particular the government unions. They spend literally billions each cycle on getting their way in elections. So we've got to fight back against that. Anything you can do to help would be super appreciated. It's stevehiltonforgovernor.com, F-O-R, stevehiltonforgovernor.com. We're having a bit of trouble with Google, so you've got to type it in correctly, stevehiltonforgovernor.com.
Well, Steve Hilton, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and good luck out there on the campaign trail. Hopefully common sense prevails.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you.